So you want to know how to fix your tendinopathy? Well, in this episode, we are going deep. We are going to explain everything that you need to know about what is commonly called tendinitis. This is a really, really important show if you're suffering with joint pain, especially in the knees and forearms or elbows. All that and more coming up. What's up, everyone? My name is Rad Burmeister. In case we haven't met, I am one of the co-founders of Unity Gym and the co-creators of the UMS, the Unified Movement System, where we take driven people and turn them into superhumans. And if the reason why we get such amazing results with our members is because we've created a program that has a perfect balance between strength and flexibility. It's very unique. And if you want to know how we do it, you can get started by downloading one of the free blueprints. We've got the flexibility blueprint, the strength blueprint, and the nutrition blueprint, all in the description of this video. You can get it for free. Now, as always, I am joined by Phil White, aka Dr. Phil, our resident physiotherapist, who is going to be delivering a kick-ass week all about tendinopathy. How you doing, Phil?
Yeah, good, exciting. I feel like, because I gave you guys the coaching calisthenics and Yanni the goal setting. Now I'm getting rewarded by talking about all my favorite things. So pain science last week, tendinopathy this week. Everything's coming up, Phil.
Yeah, that's right. And this is a topic. The reason why I'm on this show is because this is near and dear to my heart. I had tendinopathy, which I thought was called tendinitis, golfer's elbow, so medial epicondylitis, meaning on the medial side of the arm, and which is more to the center line. If you don't know what medial is more to the center line, lateral is further from the center line, and it stopped me dead in my tracks. I got to a point where I couldn't even hang from a pull-up bar and go like that without being in excruciating pain. Then I got over that. It took me about 9 to 12 months to get over it, and then another 6 months of gradually increasing the load tolerance. And then shortly after that, maybe a year or so, I got lateral epicondylitis, what's known as tennis elbow. And if it wasn't for this man here, I would not have gotten over it because I really had no idea how to deal with it. So if here he is today, I'm just really going to be making sure that he doesn't go too far down the rabbit hole and try and keep it a little bit simplified and maybe answer some questions that he wants to ask me about my experience. Take it away, Phil.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an important place to start by just having there's been a few different words thrown around there for the same condition, and it's definitely a really confusing one that I didn't quite understand until I got into physio school about what is tendinitis, what is these epicondylitis, these different words to describe pretty much the same issue. So I guess it's a really interesting and changing sort of place with tendinopathy. So but the big thing is that we've landed on the term tendinopathy because it I guess helps describe what's going on there a bit better than tendinitis. So just to with itis, with all medical words, they always mean something. So with itis, it means that there's an inflammatory component to the condition. So generally with inflammatory components, you just let the inflammation run its course, maybe give it a bit of ice to settle things down again, and you can be on your way. But I think if anyone's had these issues before, they realize it doesn't quite work like that, and there's something that sticks around for a lot longer than something you'd usually think of just being as a bit inflammatory. So
itis is something that can be fixed with ice.
Not necessarily, but you're probably
I was going to say the same.
I was going to say that makes perfect sense to me now, but you floored me.
Go the Niners! Woo! Super Bowl Monday or Sunday.
Yeah, Yanni gave me this big spiel about why Rad was doing the show and not him, and I think it's just because
he's pretty much watching the Super Bowl on his computer back up there. So yeah, anyway.
Yeah. So I know that might this kind of distinguishing with the words might be a bit meaningless for some people, but if you've watched this show long enough, you know that I get really particular about the way we use our words because it does inform so much about our understanding of how we
Whereas I, on the other hand, go, I can't remember the name of that, but whatever.
Yeah. And so the other word that sometimes gets thrown around a bit is tendinosis. And so osis is kind of more referring to a degenerative disease. So they kind of thought, oh, no, it's not inflammatory. It's more like, arthritis for your tendons or something like that. So tendinosis was kind of used there for a while. So I'm just trying to get all these terms that, if people have tried to Dr. Google themselves before, they might be searching for. So, yeah, with tendinosis, they thought it was like totally a degenerative thing and it was like arthritis. But they've kind of landed on somewhere in the middle where there's they've kind of started to realize that there are inflammatory components and there are sort of degenerative components, but yeah, we've landed on tendinopathy, and that's what we're going to go through from there.
And I think I've self-taught myself that the word ectomy must mean removal.
Yeah, it means to cut something out.
Right, because I had a hemorrhoidectomy 3 weeks ago,
Yeah.
and they cut the hemorrhoids out of my butt.
Yeah.
And then I just had 2 days ago a nailectomy.
Yeah,
where they
I got
ripped
really-
the goddamn nail off my foot because I had an ingrown
I nearly
toenail.
didn't make it to the end of one of those sentences there, so sorry if I was a bit garbled.
If
Because I just looked
you
down
could see
and,
my big toe right now, on
Yeah.
Friday they ripped the nail off
yeah,
with pliers.
I
So
was mid
times.
sentence and then just looked down and saw his gross
times.
toenail. So sorry if I got a bit word
So,
salad there.
so we're talking about knee tendinopathy today.
Yeah, I
is
thought
that
it'd be
right?
a good place to start because
Yeah.
tendinopathy is such a broad thing. It like you can get tendinopathies in most parts of your body, and so I thought we'd start with patella, so knee tendinopathy, just because it's something that's probably quite related to the gym population that we'd get watching this show. And I know everyone wants to know about the medial forearm tendinopathy that you mentioned and you've had a problem with. But I thought I'd start with the knee because there's pretty much all the research is in lower limb stuff. And so I've been doing sort of a deep dive and trying to learn from all the different experts in tendinopathy, and they all talk about lower limb. So I thought it'd be a good place to start.
Yeah,
and then
for sure.
I'll keep
For sure.
digging deeper and define.
Well, and a lot of people get it. A lot of people
yeah, it's huge.
talk about knee pain. So
yeah, Richie behind the camera.
Yeah.
He's been he's had a bit of patella tendinopathy for a long time, and it can
Yeah.
be really tricky when you're trying to achieve goals in the gym.
Yeah. So talk us through the symptoms. What kind of symptoms are we
Yeah, well,
talking
maybe
here?
it'd be a good place to start with what is a tendon.
Okay.
Just to get really broad, because sometimes people get a bit
Yeah, I love
confused.
it.
I think
I
between
love it. I love it.
ligaments, tendons. What's the
I'm
difference?
a trainer, and I've been trained in this stuff, and I still love hearing you talk about it because
Yeah,
your
it just
knowledge
gets a
is so
bit-
much deeper than mine.
It just
so.
gets a bit confusing. So with all the different terms, so with ligaments, remember that ligaments are attaching bones to bone. So there's no kind of active component there. It's just sort of like you've got these things that are just keeping the bones attached. So you can't, no matter how hard you think about it, you can't move your ligaments around. It'd be pretty cool if you could do some weird stuff there. But so a tendon is what attaches.
And they're not elastic, are they, ligaments?
They're
They're very limited
very
give.
limited elasticity, but then there's some depending on people. So with all things humans, there's so much variety,
Yeah,
and so
of
some
course.
people have it's basically a spectrum of how loose and lax your ligaments can be and how elastic they can be.
Yeah.
And so there's the really far end of the spectrum is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is kind of related to tendinopathy as well. If you've got this syndrome where you basically get a whole lot more sort of laxity, whereas for other people on the very end of the spectrum, they have super rigidity in their ligaments. So
Yep.
yeah, there's a big spectrum.
Yep.
And so now with tendons are what attaches muscles to bones. So whenever you're moving, what is happening is you've got these muscles that are, going back and forth and contracting and
filament
relaxing.
theory, yeah.
They're sliding the filaments along to produce force, and if they weren't attached to a bone, nothing would move. So the tendons.
So it's where the muscle, the big bulk of the muscle, comes down to a very small point and connects onto the bone.
Yeah, exactly right. And usually, most people would have seen sort of anatomy posters or maps or whatever, those things you see in the physio rooms when you go in. It's the kind of white bit that attaches into the bone.
And so for those of you that don't know, and I'll see if I'm getting this right, tendons generally have a lower blood supply than muscle.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And they go through the most load for a muscle because all of the load of all the muscle fibers has to hit that tendon to produce force.
Yeah, exactly
which is
right.
one of those are two of the factors as to why tendinopathy is something that occurs. Is that right?
Yeah, and why it can be sort of so tricky to heal because we've talked a bit about meniscus before, and areas where you don't get much blood supply are generally going to take a bit longer to change because you're not kind of getting this turnover of nutrients and everything. So that's certainly true of the tendons. What tendons are, it's mostly inert collagen fibers. So collagen fibers are basically the kind of scaffolding that you have them in your muscles and everywhere, but they are really just a strong, able to take tensile force really well. And these guys have and in the tendons you get a lot more stretch as well. So with the tendon, a large part of what they do, especially in the lower limb, is about energy storage and release. So what that means is basically they act like springs. And so the human body is really clever in making itself really efficient. So if you didn't have these springs, and we'd have to put in way more you'd have to use many more calories to burn kilojoules in Australia. to get that same amount of propulsion. But if you have a spring, you're not putting any metabolic effort into that, so you get this great efficiency. So for your Achilles, that's an example of a structure that is just this big giant spring that is kind of recreated. And when you see like Oscar Pistorius in the or the Paralympians, and they basically just replace it with an actual spring. But we've got that in our body through tendons.
Yep.
So
that's what a tendon is. So do you want to talk us through what the symptoms would be felt of? So we're talking knee tendonitis or patellar tendonitis. Are we talking about the tendons of the quadricep?
Yeah, so if you're looking at with the patellar tendinopathies, it's usually kind of below the knee. So the knee cap is called the patella, and so at the closest towards your foot, you get your patellar tendon, and then you have your quadricep tendon attaches onto the top of your kneecap, so closer to your hips. So you don't generally get that kind of quadricep tendinopathy. It's not so common. But the patellar tendinopathy, where your patella, all the muscles of your quads go down into your kneecap, and then they're all producing force just through that really quite a narrow tendon going from the bottom part of your patella into your shin. So you can see how there's just so much muscular force production that's going on in your quads.
Yeah,
gets
into
all
that
like
point,
kind of put into that kneecap, and then all of that then goes through this little tendon. And so you might, if you've been paying attention, be a bit confused there, because when we talked about what a ligament and what a tendon is, like a ligament is attaching bone to bone, and in this case it's your patella going into your shin, which you'd think that's bone to bone.
Yeah, but the patella is considered a floating bone, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's called a sesamoid bone, which is basically, it's that floating, it's there to act as like a extra sort of fulcrum to be able to increase the force. But so just for those playing at home, we're still counting this as the patellar tendon.
So the pain's going to be experienced under the kneecap. That's what the...
generally not. So this is where you're going to get, well, when you say under, I guess there's different ways of below.
Inferior.
Yeah, so below the kneecap, so further towards your feet. So that little bit that sticks out if you tense your quads.
Yeah.
So, but if it's underneath the actual kneecap, as if you push straight down, like into your body on your kneecap, and you were feeling pain under there, then that's often a bit different. There can be things on the cartilage on the underside of your patella, or there's fat pads and all sorts of different stuff. So it is really important that you go and see someone who's knows what they're talking about and can really identify things here. So,
are there any tests that anyone can do at home that, like, if people are suspecting that they might have? So what are we calling it? Patellar tendonitis?
Tendinopathy.
Look at that. See, stuffed it up already.
Yeah,
is that what you call it? Patellar tendinopathy?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
is there any test that anyone can do at home?
People also might have heard of jumper's knee, is sometimes what people refer to this as. But yes, there's some general characteristics which are really classic for tendinopathy, and generally that is that it likes getting warmed up. So if you have some pain in your knee, that when you first start out and you're like, maybe you wake up early, you go to the gym, and like even walking up some steps,
as soon as you start moving, you're like, oh my god,
yeah, you really feel like that kind of stiff soreness around your knee, and then as you warm up, it gets better. That's generally making you think, okay, this is probably a tendinopathy. Whereas if you have like patellofemoral pain syndrome, where you've got like, I guess the passive structures in there that are, getting more and more aggravated as you training, and it's getting worse throughout the session, then you're probably moving away from thinking it's tendinopathy and more towards like a different thing in your knee, or like a meniscus that you keep on aggravating, and that gets worse and worse and worse. So that's one kind of classic thing about tendinopathy. Another one is that the next day, often, like when you wake up first thing, you'll get feedback on the day before. So if you've really overdone it, then it's quite classic to kind of wake up and feel like, whoa.
So to sum that up, you go to the gym, you're walking up the stairs to the gym, and you're like, oh man, there's some pain here. And you do your first couple of sets and you're like, oh man, this is no good. But then you're like, oh wow, this is fine, let's go for it. And then you get up the next morning and you're like, oh my God, it's worse.
Yeah.
Would that be a good summary of what you've just said?
That's often the case.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I experienced with my tendinitis. I'd be like, you know why? Because we spend so many years calling it tendinitis,
I know,
and
exactly.
we've made so many videos where we called it tendinitis.
For sure.
So tendinopathy, and I was like, I'd start my workout and I'd be like, Jesus, man, this is really painful, and then I'd be like, wow, hang on a minute, I'm going for it, and then the next day I'd be like, oh my God, I'm in agony, So I can really relate to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of the really common things that make you think like, okay, this is probably patellar tendinopathy. The
Yeah.
other thing is generally quite localized, so you don't kind of get this diffuse all around your knee pain. It's
Yeah, it's
usually just
really
like
isolated, isn't it?
pinpoint on the spot.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yep.
that's kind of one of those
Yep.
things that.
So you've, if anybody out there is watching and they're going, that's me, and they're suspecting that this is what they've got, what should they do?
Well, first off, go and talk to someone who knows what they're,
doing,
with tendinopathy, up to date on everything, and get it diagnosed. That's just like step one, really important, because when we're going to go into, I guess, how to treat this, it's quite different to if you were treating, like a meniscus pain or something like that. So just with two things that I just want to also point out with tendons is that, as I said, the energy storage and release, that spring-like mechanism is a really key component to what's happening in tendinopathy. So why I kind of mentioned jumper's knee before is that it's really common in people who've played a lot of jumping sports, so basketball or in volleyball. And so one really key, I'm going to pause here and say the big thing that I want people to understand about tendinopathy is that you might have the pathology. So if you were to cut open your leg and have a look at the tendon, or you get imaging, probably more likely, and you had imaging, it's quite likely that you have some level of pathology, so some change in that tendon, but it doesn't always mean that that is actually causing you any problem at all. So with volleyball, it's a really classic one where they did some studies on it where they looked at a whole bunch of collegiate volleyball players, and they had, it was like 20-25% of the players had these changes in their knees, but it was not necessarily the fact that there was a few that had pain, but it really didn't correlate to the amount of changes in your knee. So it used to be people would think like, oh no, you've got tendinopathy, you're done for life, but it's kind of what the body does to protect that area, because the thing that causes tendinopathy is a mismanagement of load. So basically, if you go above your body's capacity, that's when this tendinopathy cascade of events happens, which causes these changes in your tendons.
So we're going to be talking more about the treatment of tendinopathy in the days to come this week, right?
I'll briefly mention it now, is that what we want to do is we want to make the tendon stronger. Yeah, so that's the big one. The big mistake that people make is like, oh, I'll rest it and it'll go away.
And I made that mistake. We all did. I remember Yanni and Richard did the same thing when we didn't understand tendinopathy as much as we do now. After we've
I remember there was a while when you guys had the elbow tendinopathy that it seemed like you're all resting and doing this with your elbows, with your wrists. Yeah. And so when we think about what, and for those listening to the podcast, going back and forth with your wrist to try and loosen up, I guess, the area. It might, that's kind of like an active rest, I guess, but the thing that makes tendons strengthen up and become capable of the loads you're trying to put on them is training. It's about getting them stronger. And so if you spend your time resting, as I've talked about capacity and load before, your capacity is basically the level your body can handle before it then starts to struggle. And basically, if you decrease your load, so how much training you're putting into that area, and you keep decreasing it with rest, then your capacity will shrink as well. Yeah. And anytime you then try and get back to
where you were before,
you can just and that's going to start that cascade again.
Yeah. So Benji is saying here, Benji's a member of our gym. He's saying, I need to book an appointment with Phil this week. I promise. What you also need to do, Benji, is spell need without a K. Need is just. I'm just giving Benji some stick because he's a. I'm pretty sure need with a K is how you need to dough, right?
I know. I was just trying to think of some joke about how I should have a booking system based on. We'll
cool.
leave that one.
So we've only got 5 minutes left, Phil. And for those of you that are watching, a couple of things. First, make sure you smash that like button and leave a comment with your name and where you're watching from so we can give you a shout out. But also understand that we're doing a week on this. So this is the introduction to tendinopathy. So what do you want to give for your final thoughts, Phil, for the last 5 minutes?
Yeah, well, I'm going to make it really clear that last point we talked on, that is it's an issue of getting that load right. So if you just rest, that's going to make things, not get better.
It'll make the pain go away, maybe, and I
Exactly.
experienced that. But then when you start to try and train again, you'll experience it'll just come
Yeah,
back
and I think
like that.
a really key thing that I want to get across is that a lot of people sort of find out they have tendinopathy from going and getting imaging because they've had this pain for a while, and then GP's like, oh yeah, we'll scan it and have a look, and then people think like, oh no, I've got this tendinopathy and that this is going to stop me from doing things in the future. But when you, again, as I mentioned with the collegiate volleyballer study, and when you look at like every pro basketballer, every volleyball player, like if you've used your body in your life, you're going to have these changes, and that's okay because I haven't had a chance to go deep into the the changes, all the kind of scientific things that happen in your, like all the physiological changes that happen in the tendon, because I think Rad's really trying to keep me on course here, but basically your body figures it out and it starts to make things stronger, and as long as you're applying a like reasonable load and you're progressively overloading and getting things stronger in a way that you're not going to just suddenly flare things up, but you're going to give it some time and bring it back to build up its capacity, then you've got a tendon that isn't fragile, it's not weak, you're going to be able to do the things you want to do.
It's funny because this stuff that you're saying is so simple once you hear someone with your level of knowledge explaining this. For me, I kind of go, wow, that is so simple. It's such a simple way of approaching things, but to actually apply it, if you don't have the level of training that somebody like me or you has, it's not so easy because you need to know what exercises are going to be right for you and how you manage that load. But once you understand that, a lot of people come to us with this fear of, I've got this injury and it's never going to go away. And now that I have learned so much about something like tendinopathy and I know how to deal with it, it just seems so simple to me. So for a lot of you that are watching, if you've been banging your head against a wall for ages, just not being able to deal with your tendinopathy, this week of shows is going to be highly valuable to you. So make sure you stick around.
Yeah, and I think you're really right there. Like it seems almost like frustrating how simple it is, but like a lot of people I think they want some like magic hands massage thing that will like break up some scar tissue or something, or they want like an electric kind of stimulating machine that will like zap it back into existence. But I think I think there's so much power in the fact that a lot of this just does come down to figuring out that load management. It's totally against human nature because what we want is some quick fix, and what we want is like
well, it's the way we've learned to deal with things in the Western world, isn't it? If we have a problem, we go to a doctor to give us some pills, or we go to a masseuse or a physio to massage us and make us better. And I guess it's just not that way, is it?
Yeah, and so I think just that last point on imaging is that like if you, someone did suspect it was tendinopathy and then they image you and they find that there's no change in the tendon, it is very unlikely that the tendon is causing your pain. So it might be somewhere like look elsewhere. But apart from that, if you were to come and see me, like there's kind of no reason why I'd send off for imaging because it's very much about is this pain load related. So that's I guess that. Going back to what I was trying to get to before with when you can figure out it's tendinopathy is like if you increase load, does it make it worse? So that might mean with a knee, if you go down into a single leg squat without weight, it's like a bit sore, and then you do down into a double, like a single leg one, and then you add some weight, and then you add an explosive component, it should just like track proportionally the pain through there. That's kind of how you can think if you've got it, but then talk to a professional, and then the way that we're going to fix it is just that simple progressive overload, but finding the right start point is the challenging thing.
Yeah, and it is. Finding the right start point and understanding how to do this is very challenging. And we've had a lot of people over the last year or so since we've been doing these live shows ask us, how do I rehabilitate my knee pain? And for that exact reason, for the amount of questions that we had, we actually created a program called the Knee Rehab Program, which you can get from us. You can purchase. If anybody wants to, just leave a comment. And it is a very cost-effective way of having a very well-written program that was written with Phil helping us, so that we could create a program that would help the majority of knee problems. So
that was for the majority of knee problems, and I think it'd be really important to do one specific to tendons because it is quite different, because what we want to kind of do is, I guess a lot of people sort of used to think like, isometrics were the key for all tendon problems, and so everyone would do isometrics and then kind of not get to that like next step, or there was a while where eccentrics were everything, and so everyone was doing eccentrics for everything. But now it's sort of there's a more nuanced understanding of like it's about people's goals for one. It's about getting people back to like having a certain thing in mind, because if you need to get that explosive stretch, shorten, spring-like stuff back in it, and you're only doing isometrics, and you're not going to be able to get there if you're not you're not training that. And the other thing with our training that we'll be going through, showing some examples, is heavy slow resistance is a lot of what is recommended now, because again with that stretch shorten cycle, that spring-like mechanism, if you're doing things really slowly, then the tendon doesn't actually mind it, and you can really load it up and you can start to promote some change. So that's what we'll be going into with the tendon specific programming. So the last thing to think about is with tendons is that the other thing that they really get challenged with that spring-like mechanism. They also get really challenged by compression. So if you're going into really deep positions in your knee and you're getting a lot of compression, being basically the patella pushing back into your leg and squishing that sort of space, that can be a thing that can really slow things down. So in the last couple of weeks, we talked I guess about the pain, kind of available range, and for this example, it might be a good time to lessen the range slightly and just take some of that compression off. But
perfect.
We'll get stuck into that when we get on the gym floor, hey?
Perfect. All right. Well, I hope you guys got something good out of that. Thanks for tuning in, Benji. And everybody else that tuned in, thank you. If you've made it this far, please hit that like button. And
rapid fire information there, so I hope it wasn't too much and there was some direction in there.
Oh,
but,
there was, man. It was unreal. It was awesome. I mean, I love hearing you talk about this stuff. It's unreal.
Yeah, and I think it's such a good one just to finish off, following on from last week's pain talk, because more and more with the understanding of tendinopathy, it does come down to how you also think about and manage your pain throughout these. So there are the factors of just the what's happening in the body parts, but it's also about what's happening in your brain as well. So as we go forward, we'll be harking back to last week's work on pain. So stay tuned.
Perfect. All right. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and we will see you tomorrow, where we're going to go deeper into tendinopathy.
Health is about performance, not just body image.
You better be willing to accept what you're going to have to do to get there.
We'll start focusing on movement goals, strength goals, flexibility goals.
When you nail that skill, that's there forever.
The body image goal doesn't get you that
It's
far.
the consistency and frequency that's going to get you there. It's not the intensity.
There's no shortcuts to mastery and movement. Destination doesn't change overnight, but your direction will.
The gym is not the place to beat up the body that you hate. It's the place to build the body that you love.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.